getting to know myself, really getting to know my own character, getting to know all these different sides or parts of me, things that previously were buried. There was a lot buried beneath the surface, a lot of sides of myself that I didn't know, that I wasn't in touch with, that I couldn't read. This was because those sides were unacceptable in my family system, unacceptable to my parents, unacceptable to the world that was connected to my parents, to my school system, to university, even to many of my friends, my social milieu. These sides had to be pushed down. Primarily, these were sides that were connected to my unresolved traumas, parts of me that had been traumatized that were forced down, a lot of my post-traumatic feelings, a lot of, let's say, sadness and anger, unmet needs connected to my unresolved traumas. A lot of this was just pushed down out of my sight, out of my consciousness. And what this left me with, when I was disconnected with those parts of myself, it left me with a certain, I don't know what you'd call it, a blindness in a way for knowing myself. And by extension, I couldn't see a lot of these similar parts in other people. My denial of parts of myself extended to denial of others. And in that way, I read other people, and myself primarily, more in 2 dimensions, not in 3 dimensions. Well, for starters, with knowing myself better, I went through a grieving process. And in this grieving process, it was a process of reclaiming those split off sides of me. Feeling all those ancient, buried historical feelings, unacceptable feelings often, having a lot of memories come back. And it was like, I was like a dry river canyon that had been dammed up, and the dam was now breaking, and all this water and life was flowing back into me, and it flowed into my face, and it flowed through my eyes. But what happened through this was that I got to connect with these parts of me on a feeling level. And I think of it in terms of really, I think this is the primary way that I learned to read myself better. I saw it in the mirror, but even just feeling it inside myself with no actual vision at all, I could feel those feelings in my mouth and in my eyes, around my eyes and the skin around my eyes, but literally in my eyes. I could feel my sadness. I could feel, anguish. And I also felt the joy of returning to myself. And it was like these feelings of coming back to me, the physical sensations of myself coming back to me were stamped into my memory so deeply. It was like these parts of me were always me. They always had been there. But having been split off for so long, it was like returning to a connection with an ancient friend who I loved so much, who loved me so much, who was me. And what happened after having gone through this process and during going through this process was that I began to be able to read so many other things in people that previously had been denied me. And I could see it in their eyes and I could see it in their mouth. And I remember early on being very open and talking about these things and watching people get very angry and get ashamed and get frustrated and deny what I was saying. That's not true. And many, many times later, learning that it was true. And sometimes people even came back to me and said, oh my God, things you said were correct. Another thing was that now having this newfound, I called it a gift, this newfound gift of being able to better read people, I realized that other people with whom I talked about it often didn't like it. They denied it. No, you're not correct. That's not correct what you're saying about that person. Sometimes people even said, that's not true what you're saying about your own self. Like, I remember talking with my parents sometimes about things I was discovering about myself. No, that's not true. You're reading yourself incorrectly. That's just a phase you're going through. You don't feel that way. You don't think that way. And it was like, wow, the world also wanted to read me incorrectly. And when I started reading myself more correctly, I threatened them. So it's a dangerous gift to be able to read people better. It's a gift that holds a lot of power. It can really threaten people's denial, upset the apple cart of their view of the world, of their view of themselves, knowing what had been done to me and my birthright of having my feelings about what had been done to me. And I'm talking the bad stuff that was done to me, the violations, the harm, the traumas, the neglect, the abuse. By really seeing who they were, a full three-dimensional picture of their characters, their history, their personalities, their truth and their lies, their healthy sides and their dishonesty, to see it all, even though they never saw it, they largely didn't see it. By being able to see this, it changed something in the way I was able to read people in the outside world. And what I've come to realize is that when I was in denial of so many different sides of my parents, when I was fundamentally unable to see them in three dimensions and just only able to see certain parts of them that were palatable to the family system, I transferred this denial onto other people. I got fooled by other people in the same way that I had been fooled by my parents. I needed to be fooled by other people. I couldn't read their character, because if I read who they really were in three dimensions, it would betray my parents. And so by protecting my parents, by protecting the sides of myself on the inside that were like my parents, I was vulnerable in the world, vulnerable to people who didn't share who they really were, perhaps didn't even know who they really were, or sometimes people who were even very manipulative, who lied about who they were. They knew who they were, they knew what they were hiding, but they didn't want to present it. And so by really getting to know my parents better, this painful, terrible process of waking up and seeing so many ugly things that I didn't want to know, so many imperfections that I didn't want to know, to revolutionize my view of my own history and where I came from, and of the people who I once thought I loved most in the world. It was like a veil was lifted, and I could much more easily see the truth in other people.